And that was John Ware reporting. Quilliam is a think tank that studies radical Islamism, and its representatives have said Saudi Arabia has stopped using the controversial textbooks, and it said that Islamic schools in Britain had to stop hate preaching, as they called it. Talal Rajab is their representative in London. He came into the studio this afternoon along with Douglas Murray from the right of centre think tank, the Centre for Social Cohesion. Mr. Murray gave me his reaction first to what the BBC investigation had found out.
Like most people in Britain, I find the reported contents of these textbooks absolutely disgusting and shocking. It's made only more so by the fact that our alleged ally, Saudi Arabia, has been found many times before to have pumped material like this into this country, and to discover they're still doing so, and indeed sponsoring this kind of material, is appalling.
Talal Rajab from Quilliam, are you as shocked?
This material has been found on numerous occasions with schools that have been linked to Saudi Arabia, so it's not something that is surprising, but it's still deeply shocking.
Surprising as well, because apparently these kind of textbooks, this kind of teaching, is out of date in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, the Saudi authorities had promised to remove some of this literature from their curriculum, and evidence has shown recently that they have actually managed to get some of these books off their own shelves. So the reason why they're still promoting them in the UK is a question that troubles me.
What do you propose Douglas Murray has done?
First of all, any school that is teaching this sort of filth must be stopped from doing so. But secondly, I have to take issue with that, actually. It's not the case that the Saudis have cleaned up their own schools. It's not the case that the Saudis have cleaned up their own act in this. One of the troubling things in this report is that some of the most virulent and disgusting material, not least the most anti-Semitic material, is actually not from extremist textbooks. It's actually from the hadith of Islam. It's from the sayings of Muhammad. Now, of course, if that stuff is going to be taught in schools, it should be taught as a historical document. Nobody in Britain in 2010 should be taught the Quran as anything other than a historical document, should be taught the hadith as anything other than a historical document. What is happening here is that they are teaching this as revealed truth and fact, and that is at the root of this problem, and that is what we need to weed out.
People in Christian Sunday schools don't necessarily teach the Bible as a historical document, do they?
Oh, they certainly do, and what's more, I think
they
you would be,
the teachings of
and
the Bible,
I think
don't
you would,
they?
I think you would be hard pushed to find a single Christian Sunday school in this country that taught anything like the kind of material here. If you went round the Christian churches of this country and the synagogues of this country, you would not find people teaching that the murder of Jews was a good idea, the murder of Muslims was a good idea, or anything like this. This is happening because the Islamic communities in this country have not got a grip on this. If Christian churches or Sunday schools were teaching this kind of filth, it would be stopped by those communities. This has to be stopped by the Muslim communities, and if it isn't, it has to be done at a higher level.
This kind of filth, Talal Rajab, is that how you would describe the material that's in these textbooks?
I find the material offensive, and I can understand why many people will be offended by the material. But as Douglas rightly points out, this material should be treated within a historical context. Just disregarding it as filth doesn't really help.
Well,
I mean,
come on, Talal. What do you want to call sets of textbooks that talk about whether those of us who are gay should be stoned to death or should be thrown off buildings? What would you describe that as?
I'd describe it as offensive material, but I'd also emphasise that such material is there within Islamic teaching, and it should be taught within a context. And I guess
what
should also be
context is there for that?
Okay, let me finish. It should also be emphasised that such teachings are not really relevant in 21st century Britain. I think that's the key.
What other situation would we find ourselves in?
The matter here.
What other situation would we find ourselves in, I ask you, where somebody was teaching how, when and where to murder a minority in this country, and somebody was able to come onto the BBC and say we have to talk about the context of those teachings? No, you simply have to say, as with any other community, if you teach incitement, you will be made to stop.
Douglas Murray, let me put it to you. It's always disturbing when racial hatred, when homophobia is taught to young people. But given that these schools are entirely private, that they were doing this on their own money and their own time, how effectively can you police teaching racial hatred? Do you burst into people's living rooms where a father is preaching racial hatred against Irish people in Britain? How far do you go to police things?
We have clear incitement rules in this country, which are, by the way, quite tough to prosecute. I mean, they rightly draw the lines very, very carefully around what is and what is not incitement.
But this is not state-sponsored incitement in any way, is it?
I'd put it this way. Would any of us talk about context, or would any of us talk about the importance of understanding if we found that there were dozens and dozens of neo-Nazi schools in this country? No, we would do everything we could as civil society to close such institutions down. And that's what we have to do with this. But instead, again and again, what we hear is the importance of understanding. There is no way in which civil society or the prosecuting authorities should do anything other than enforce a total, across-societal disgust for this kind of material.
Talal, Rajab, how much right should the British authorities and the watchdog for education have to walk into the private classes of any of these schools and say, stop right there?
I think you raise a very important question here, the fact that these schools are private. But one important thing to know is that we are dealing with a problem within Muslim communities today of extremism and of hatred. And it's important, therefore, for the Muslim communities themselves to work with the relevant authorities to make sure that the material doesn't go against regulations. So I think that the government and Ofsted does have a right in this instance to go into these schools and make sure this material isn't reproduced.
Talal Rajab from the Islamic think tank Quilliam, and Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion. You're listening to the BBC World Service.